In recent years, the conflict-ridden region of Palestine has been a source of ongoing disputes, all stemming from an ancient Jewish mythological story known as the Promised Land, which is part of the creation myth. Before delving into the stories of Abraham, the Israelite people, and the Promised Land, we need to clarify a concept. Although Jewish mythology, through the influence of Christianity and Islam, has become the foundation for the world's largest religious systems today, it's important to note that all three, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, are interrelated and collectively referred to as the Abrahamic religions. Together, they have a vast number of followers, accounting for nearly half of the world's population. If this is your first time tuning into our channel, the primary focus here is to provide critical perspectives on historical or societal controversial events, offering insightful descriptions and commentary. If you are interested, please consider subscribing to our channel and turning on the notification bell. Let's get started. The core of these stories essentially constitutes the ancient Jewish creation myth, a type of myth that was quite common in antiquity. These myths can be found in large ancient civilizations, as well as among indigenous peoples in the Pacific Islands. They serve as the fundamental narratives for defining a culture, ethnicity, or even a civilization. Ancient people used these stories to establish their own national and ideological identity. From Greek mythologies Zeus, Egyptian mythologies Ra, Indian mythologies Brahma, Chinese mythologies Nuwa and Fuxi, Japanese mythologies Amaterasu, to Jewish mythologies Yahweh, they all belong to the category of creation myths. Their structures are more or less similar, generally starting from a primordial chaos or void, followed by the creation of everything including humanity. These myths also establish values and notions of a chosen people, among other elements. Therefore, regardless of your religious background, it is essential to set aside subjectivity and bias and consider these concepts from the perspective of creation myths, rather than exclusively associating them with figures like Yahweh or Abraham. It's worth noting that the name of the Jewish God was originally considered unpronounceable, and there are many translations of the Hebrew Bible. For ease of communication, the descriptions below will use names and scriptures familiar to many, such as the Christianized names and texts. The Promised Land. The story of the Promised Land originates from Yahweh's promise to Abraham. By that time, the world had already witnessed the creation of the heavens, the earth, and all living things, the fall of humanity. Stories like the Great Flood, Noah's Ark, and the Tower of Babel. Following these events, Yahweh chose Abraham from among the people of the earth and after a period of testing designated him as the chosen one. Broadly speaking, Abraham is considered the origin and ancestor of the Jewish people and to some extent certain Arab peoples. The legend of the Promised Land begins in Genesis chapter 12 section 1 and 7, where Yahweh makes a covenant with Abraham. Yahweh commands Abraham to leave his family and journey to the land he has promised to Abraham's descendants. However, the geographical location of the Promised Land is somewhat vague, described as the land from the Nile to the Euphrates in Genesis chapter 15 section 18. The subsequent verses, Genesis chapter 15 section 19 to 21, mention the 10 nations already inhabiting this land. In later books like Numbers and Ezekiel, Yahweh provides more specific descriptions of the Promised Land, although there are slight variations between the two accounts. In general, the Promised Land is understood to extend east to the Jordan River, west to the Mediterranean Sea, north to the borders of Lebanon and Syria, and south to the Dead Sea, corresponding to modern-day Israel, Palestine, and Lebanon. Throughout the Hebrew Bible, there are numerous chapters and passages reiterating Yahweh's promise of the Promised Land, chosen people. In essence, the myth of the Promised Land revolves around two primary aspects: the land itself and the people entitled to it. The central dispute is about who qualifies as the descendants of Abraham and, therefore, who has the right to inhabit the Promised Land. From the Jewish perspective, it's clear-cut only Jewish people, or more accurately, the descendants of the lineage from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob and his 12 sons, who became the ancestors of the 12 tribes of Israel, are considered the rightful inheritors. Their rationale is rooted in passages from the book of Deuteronomy, where Moses imparts God's word. However, there is a broader viewpoint suggesting that Yahweh's direct promise to Abraham, as found in several passages in Genesis 12 and 15, means that the Promised Land should belong to all of Abraham's descendants. Genesis chapter 12 section 7 states, "The Lord appeared to Abram and said, 'To your descendants I will give this land.'" In this interpretation, the Promised Land is considered to be the rightful heritage of all of Abraham's descendants. Genesis also records that in addition to Isaac, Abraham had another son named Ishmael. Ishmael in turn had 12 sons and is regarded as the ancestor of the Arab people. It is believed that these 12 sons later developed into the 12 nations of the Arabs. Some traditions even suggest that the Islamic prophet Muhammad is a descendant of Ishmael's eldest son, Nebaioth. So, while the issue of the Promised Land is a matter of great significance, it is rooted in differing interpretations of who qualifies as the rightful inheritors, which has contributed to the ongoing disputes and conflicts in the region. Another version suggests it is the descendants of Abraham's second son, Keturah. This viewpoint asserts that some Arabs are also descendants of Abraham and thus have a claim to the Promised Land. In fact, Arabs are the historical inhabitants of the region who ruled it for millennia. According to the book of Genesis, the descendants of Abraham branched out into 4 main groups. One of these groups is the Edomites. Isaac, in addition to Jacob, had an elder son named Esau, who is considered the ancestor of the Edomites. Tradition has it that during the division of Israel into the southern kingdom of Judah and the Edomite kingdom in the south, the Edomites later assimilated into Arab society. This suggests that Herod the Great, who lived during the time of Jesus, was an Edomite. Would his rule also be considered as fulfilling the promise of the Promised Land? So, even by the account presented in the Hebrew Bible, aside from the 12 tribes of Israel, there are indeed many other descendants of Abraham. Returning to reality, the story concludes. For non-believers or those of us living in distant corners of the world, all of this might seem like a collection of mythological tales. However, for Jewish people and some Christians, the legends of Abraham having a son at the age of 100 living to be 175 and the promise of the Promised Land are matters of deep faith. The entire concept of Jewish nationalism is founded on these myths. Furthermore, it's essential to consider that in the year 1000 BCE, the ancient Israelites established a rudimentary nation in the region. It existed sporadically for a few centuries. Over the course of the following 2,000 years, many different cultures lived in the area, contributing to its rich history. Fast forward to the 20th century, when a group of outsiders, armed with the abstract concept of being descendants of Abraham and the legend of the Promised Land, declared their intent to return to this land and re-establish a nation. This has led to the ongoing turmoil and conflicts in the modern era. In conclusion, we should pose a question to ourselves. Is the Promised Land truly an inviolable sacred territory from time immemorial that comes directly from a divine source? And is this mythological promise a valid basis for founding a nation in the 20th century post-World War II? In today's modern society, if Israel can do it, should other nations follow a similar path? Taking a step back, let's assume that we all accept nation building based on mythology. In the book of Genesis, Yahweh's promise to Abraham clearly mentions that the Promised Land was originally inhabited by 10 nations. The text doesn't unequivocally indicate that God's promise for the Promised Land is unconditionally exclusive. This video concludes here. I intentionally refrained from expressing personal opinions, even though I have many. What's important is to present various perspectives that stem from mythological stories, encouraging thoughtful contemplation. If you have any insights or additional information about nation building in the context of the Promised Land, please share them in the comments below. If you want to continue supporting this channel, remember to like, comment, subscribe and click the notification bell to ensure you don't miss any episodes. Lastly, if being radical is the new norm and objectivity is considered heretical, perhaps we should be radically objective. Until next time, stay curious and stay unconventional.